right, so our next speaker will be the lovely Professor Lesa Ellis. Yeah! Yeah! Love it. This is why I love Westminster. Exactly this. So I loved my time here at Westminster, and one of the main reasons for that was Lesa Ellis as one of my favorite professors. She, along with her colleagues, are fabulous professors that inspire curiosity in students, guide students as they grow in knowledge and learn to rigorously investigate things, and that successfully make the subject matter accessible and relevant. That's an important piece for me. Anyone attending Westminster after Lesa arrived in the early 2000s remembers looking at the May term course list and seeing the provocatively named Sex in the Brain class, right? It was very popular for some reason. It turned out to be less about sex, though, and more about brain, thought, emotion, behavior, connection. But that's how Lesa operates. She sets the hook and reels you in with an unstoppable combination of intriguingly packaged topics, and she examines those with inquisitive intellect. She teaches with a no excuses, you too can learn this because it is one of the most exciting things ever. And she delivers it all with a lingering and endearing Southern Utah accent, which I love. Lesa is a Westminster graduate, and we are fortunate that she returned here to become a professor of neuroscience and psychology, as well as professor and mentor to students in the Honors and McNair Scholars programs. Her research includes brain-based systems of emotion regulation and genetic contributions to emotion regulation. Talking to us this evening about how to regulate emotions, brain. Please welcome Dr. Lesa Ellis.
Hello. So I am going to be talking to you tonight about emotion processing in the brain, and particularly about processing and regulation of stress. So just by a raise of your hand, have any of you ever experienced stress? Okay, so you probably know what it feels like, right? Okay, so you'll know what I'm talking about. So when we talk about emotion processing in the brain, it basically consists of two different components. There's emotion reactivity, and that's what happens in our brain when we come across something in the environment that we find arousing. And that can be good or that can be bad. There's also emotion regulation, and that's what happens as we try to control that reactivity so that we can walk around behaving like an adult rather than like a Neanderthal, I guess. So it turns out that these brain areas that are important in emotion processing undergo a great deal of development during adolescence and young adulthood. And some of that development is triggered by puberty. Yeah. So I put fireworks on this slide because it turns out that puberty is a pretty dramatic event in our development. So I'm sure we all remember with tremendous fondness those lovely changes that happen to our bodies because of pubertal hormones, yes? Okay. Those pubertal hormones were also changing our brains in pretty significant ways. So most of you are probably aware that the cells in our brains, or neurons pictured here, send signals to each other via special chemicals called neurotransmitters. Now, pubertal hormones travel through the bloodstream to our brain, where they basically act as neurotransmitters and change the way those signals are sent. More specifically, they increase activity in the areas of the brain that process emotion reactivity, which kind of explains why you lose your mind when you go through puberty. You may remember that. one of the areas that is particularly affected by this is something called amygdala. And we actually have two of these in our brain. It's the little yellow areas on the brain scan there. Amygdala is very specialized, and its function is the same if you're a human or any other animal. It's basically the threat detection system. So when we encounter something in our environment that we find threatening, activity in amygdala goes up, sends a signal to start the stress reactivity system, which then results in fight or flight, okay? So this is a really adaptive system if we're being chased by a big scary bear. It allows us to run really fast and to be all alert and vigilant while we fight for survival. Here's the problem. This same system is activated when we wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning because we have a chemistry exam the next day. Our amygdala cannot tell the difference between a physical, immediate threat that's standing right next to us and something we are conjuring up in our imagination. Now, the threat or the reaction might be bigger to the bear, but the mechanism is exactly the same. Okay. While this is a very helpful mechanism if you're being chased by a bear, if you activate this system over and over for long periods of time, the chemicals that are released in this process become toxic to our bodies. And actually, stress over long periods of time, these chemicals can cause a lot of fairly serious illnesses. In addition, these chemicals interact with specialized learning and memory cells in an area of the brain called hippocampus, shown here. In small amounts, these stress hormones help these cells to form very strong memories for stressful events. In large amounts, it actually damages these cells, and the cells can no longer make new memories. So ironically, when you worry about your learning, you're ruining your ability to learn in the future. That's a problem, right? Okay. Another problem with this system is that it's reactive, meaning it happens automatically, and this system is triggered before you even have a chance to think about it. So it can make it feel like you have no control over it, right? But amazingly, we have a secondary system in our brain that allows us to modulate that stress reactivity. So how does that work? It's really complicated. But I'm going to walk you through it conceptually with the use of a really cool piece of artwork that I found. So let's say you're a college freshman, and this is your brain, and there's an awful lot of stuff going on in there. And at any given time, there are 101 things you could or should be thinking about or paying attention to in your brain. You're listening to the radio, and you hear a story about how Congress is thinking about raising the interest rate on student loans. So you start thinking about how many student loans you're going to have, and how are you going to pay for them, and how are you going to get a job. Okay. Now you're focused on thinking about money, and everything else kind of fades into the background. So then you're thinking about getting a job, which leads you to graduation, which leads you to worry about graduating because you have this chemistry test tomorrow that you're not feeling good about. And now you're worrying. Amygdala activity goes up, kicks off that stress reactivity system. Boom, you're in fight or flight mode. All of a sudden, you can't think, okay? So if you're a really well-regulated college freshman, you might take a step back and say, this is not very productive. I need to study for my chemistry exam. So you take out your chemistry book, you shift your attention, and all of a sudden, all that stress reactivity goes away. Amygdala shuts down, it all turns off, and you can study. How does your brain do that? Okay, right behind this part of your forehead, in the prefrontal part of the brain, we have structures that have connections to all different parts of the brain, including amygdala. These structures allow us to shift and focus our attention at will. Now, as we move our attention around, we actually increase activity to things we pay attention to and decrease activity to things we're not paying attention to. So when we pay attention to things that stress us out, we increase activity in amygdala. that makes our stress reactivity system go haywire. If we turn our attention away from it, that amygdala activity goes down. Now, this system is under our conscious control. It's called executive attention. What this means is that we change the way neurons fire in our brains when we consciously decide to shift our attention. That is freaking amazing. Coolest thing ever, actually. Okay, how awesome is that? Yes. Okay, so that is the good news. This is the bad news. These areas that are able to do this mature very, very slowly. So turns out they actually don't mature until you're probably in your mid to late 20s and maybe even later than that. We're not quite sure at this point in time. So you've got this early maturation of the reactive systems, very late maturation of the regulatory systems. So what does that look like behaviorally? What I have here is I've plotted emotional reactivity in red, prefrontal regulation in the blue, and then developmental stage across the bottom. So with the onset of puberty, you have a big increase in emotion reactivity, and you've just got this regulation kind of slowly maturing. And it doesn't really catch up until you're somewhere out there in grown-uphood, whenever the heck that is. Now, if you're a college student and you're coming to college at traditional age, you're kind of at that point marked late adolescence. So your brain is still very reactive, but your regulation has not caught up yet. So you're going to get here, we're going to pile more work on you than you've ever had in your life, okay? And you don't have the regulation to deal with that stress. Now, people do have individual differences in how well they're able to do with this, but suffice it to say, there's going to be a certain percentage of students who are going to become pretty much overwhelmed by stress, okay? So we could just sit back and hope their brains develop soon, but I think we can do better than that. So developing brains are plastic brains, and what I mean by that is when a brain is developing, new connections are able to be made more easily than at any other time in life. And the environment can influence those connections better than at any other time, okay? So what we want to do is we want to influence this system to give people the ability to shift away from those useless worrying thoughts and turn down that amygdala activity. Turns out there's a system in place already, it's been used for a very long time that works really well for this: meditation. I know that sounds all woo-woo and whatever, but I borrowed that word from Nina. Okay, when we meditate, what we are doing is we are practicing controlling and regulating our executive attention. And in fact, when people meditate in an fMRI brain scanner, the parts of the brain that are being activated are those executive attention areas in the prefrontal brain. Okay. People who meditate show significant increases in emotion regulation, academic performance, health outcomes, and so on, and it changes their brains in measurable ways. Here's the thinking big part. Fall of 2014, I'm going to do a study, 2 groups of incoming students. They're both going to take a class about their brains. One group is also going to take a meditation class. Another group will take a fitness class. I'm going to get baseline measures of executive attention and emotion regulation, follow them through the school year. If the meditation group shows the type of changes that I think they will, I am going to push for meditation to be a part of first-year education for every student. I mean, why the hell not? Right? We're a college. We're in business to change people's brains. We could give our students the gift of emotion regulation that they can take with them everywhere they go for the rest of their lives. And while I was at it, I came up with a new logo for the school, or a new slogan. Westminster, changing lives and changing brains. Thank you.